remember we talked about the Americans with Disabilities Act and how important it is for us to provide work opportunities for qualified individuals, even if they have a disability. The goal, of course, is always to make sure that we're hiring people with or without an accommodation, people who can do the job with or without an accommodation. So we start with our job analysis, as we've talked about, creating good job descriptions, having clarity about what the essential functions are of the job. And then in our interview process, we have to make sure that we are hiring people who can do that job with or without a reasonable accommodation. And that is the question that we ask. Can you do this job with or without a reasonable accommodation? And they answer you yes or no. But they can only answer yes or no if you've done a really good job of communicating exactly what those expectations are, hence having a really good job description. And we're legally obligated to ask that question. All right. It doesn't mean that we don't want to let unconscious bias, manage our perception. Someone comes in a wheelchair, it's very easy to assume they may have a mental incapacity as well as a physical incapacity, because that's just what our brains do. We make assumptions about people. When we see someone in a wheelchair, we assume certain things about them. And so the goal, of course, is to make sure that we have managed our unconscious bias by really reinforcing how important it is to hire people with or without with or without an accommodation that can do the essential functions of the job. So when we set our strategic goals for recruitment, right, we want to be careful of the goals that we set, because remember, people will work to the goals that are set up for them, and they will only work to the goals that are set up for them. So if you don't do a good job being clear about what the goals are, you're not going to get a wide variety of outcomes that you're looking for. They're only going to do that which they will get a reward for. So basically, you get what you pay for. If you're paying for them to do X, that's all they're going to do is X, right? So if you want to have broad goals and broad expectations in terms of recruiting behaviors, you've got to incentivize or reward the proper behaviors that you want. You want quantity and quality of applicants, not just a bunch of low quality applicants or very few high quality. You want to have a good broad skill set. You want to make sure you're rewarding people to have a diverse pool, because the diverse pool increases the likelihood you will find the best applicants. And diverse pools matter because A, we don't want homogeneity, but B, if you are only going to hire from white males, you have just cut yourself off from half of the working population, more than half. And if you cut yourself off from half of the working population, you are not necessarily going to find the best applicant for a job. So we want to cast a wide net to have a wide variety of people to increase the likelihood we find the best applicant to do the job. So make sure when we set our recruitment goals that we do so rewarding the behaviors and the outcomes that we want. And it's going to take a little trial and error to figure that out, because often we think we've got it all figured out, and then we realize we really did set a poor goal because it's rewarding people to do something we don't want them to do. KPIs are a really important tool for recruitment. Remember I said, we're going to get a whole lot of different applicants, and we want to use that funnel approach to go from a broad swath of applicants and narrow it little by little by little. And so we want to assess each of our recruitment sources for how good, first of all, they generate quality applicants. Then how long they stay in the process. Like, for those applicants that are hired, that are attracted, how many of them actually apply for the job, stay in the recruitment process, right? Once you say, hey, you passed the screening, do you want to continue in the recruitment process? Sometimes they say, no, I don't want to. So we want a source that not only generates the applicants, but keeps them in the process so that they apply for the job, that they are engaged in the recruitment and the selection process down the line, ultimately accept a job if offered, and then they are willing to stay here for more than a few months. So typically we measure the 6-month mark. So how many applicants does this source generate that stayed 6 months or more with the company? Then we want to look at, how do we onboard them? How do we get them familiar with the company, and how do we get them engaged with the company and up to speed as quickly as possible? So these are metrics that we evaluate at each step of the recruiting process. And you'll see exercises in our modules that get at how to calculate these, what we call them, yield ratios. These yield ratios enable us to assess which applicant sources are the best for us to use. How we treat people during the recruitment process matters. Treating them with respect, treating them like they are a human being and that they're deserved of being treated well, that they deserve transparent information, that they deserve to be treated fairly and without bias, to make sure we're communicating with people. You all have been on the receiving end of a job and applied for something and then never heard anything back. It is an awful feeling, and I encourage everybody who works in HR to make sure they always communicate to their applicants, even if they got a resume. Generate a letter that says, here is, thank you for applying. We are going to be screening resumes by this date. We will then be inviting people into the next phase of our staffing process by this date. If you don't hear from us, please feel free to reach out, but we will let you know if you've made it past the next process one way or the other. So making sure we let people know the timing, communicating what our expectations are with people. This makes a difference because this impacts people's experiences working with you. You are signaling to a potential employee how you will treat them when they come on board later. So the worse that you treat them during the recruitment process, the less likely they are to take the job, because they don't want to work for a company that treats them poorly. Or if you do attract somebody, it will not necessarily be your best applicants. It'll probably be the person who's desperate for a job and will take whatever they can get, even if they don't get treated fairly and kindly. The recruitment process, remember, because it is a two-way street. You are trying to attract them and they are screening you, whether or not they want to come work for you. So you have to put your best face forward. You have to be treating people justly, fairly. We want to make sure that we are providing what we call an informational interview, where we provide them with information and answer all of their questions, because again, we're marketing. We're trying to sell people. And so you have to be transparent and provide them with accurate, truthful information. Later on, we engage in what we call the selection interview, which is much more evaluative. So the selection interview is one of many tools that we use for evaluating applicants. It shouldn't be the only one you use. But they are two different kinds of interviews. One provides information and just allows for a Q&A session between the applicant and the employer, potential employer. And the selection interview gets into more substantive questions about whether or not someone can do a particular job. And both of them are important, and they both assess for different reasons. Maintaining applicant interest is really important. We want them to stay in the recruitment and selection process. So it's not enough to just do an informational interview. It is important to bring people on site. They want to see what their potential future workplace is going to look like, to meet people that they're going to work with, to get to know the dynamics of the company, and they can get some hint of what the company is like by doing a site visit and getting to know the employees and getting to know the company culture and things like that. So It helps them to have more realistic expectations because you can't hide stuff from people when they come and make a site visit. And it does allow for more in-depth interaction and more personalized interaction, which is how we work with and build a relationship with the individual that we would like to hire in the long run. In more advanced courses on staffing, you will hear uh, information on how do we manage our brand as an organization? What is our image? What is our reputation? All of these are marketing tools and marketing terms that we also apply to the recruitment process. So when you are involved in recruiting, you want to know how you're going to package your company. What are you going to present to them? How do you want them to think about you? You're going to look for target markets, right? You're going to look for the kinds of applicants that you want, and you want to segment your marketplace, and you want to attract people from a wide variety of segments in order to improve the likelihood of finding the best person for the job. And then we want to make sure we're putting our best foot forward because we want good fit, not just person job fit, because I can hire anybody to do a particular job. But what I want is somebody who can do the job and work with this pool of applicants that I have, that can interact with them well, that can fit into the culture and the way that we see the world, the way what we value. Kind of goes back to those values that we talked about in the very first module, right? About strategic HR and making sure that we communicate the values of the company because that sets the tone for the company culture. We want people to know about the important job features. What are they going to expect? What does a typical day look like doing this job? And if somebody has multiple offers, you need to know how you're going to manage that. Do you want this person bad enough that you're willing to compete to pay them more money or provide them with more perks or benefits in order to get them to come work for you? And that is a fair thing to do. If you have a good candidate that is competitive, we can sometimes pay a little bit more money to do that. But we also need to make sure we're not only doing this for some groups and not at others, meaning only doing it for white candidates but not for other racial groups, or only doing it for men but not women. And again, you may not be doing it intentionally, but even if it's not intentional, it is still a form of employment discrimination. So we just need to be monitoring that and making sure we're not creating problems.